Hello and welcome. In today's analysis, we explore a very fundamental question about how we live together. It is about the psychology behind the idea of us versus them. Together we will see that the divisions we often experience do not necessarily come from bad intentions. Their roots lie much deeper, in a very human need, the desire for a strong and clear identity. Let's start with a simple question. Think about it for a moment. In sports, in politics, and even in everyday life, we constantly form groups. We draw invisible lines between us and them. But why do we do this? What makes this mechanism so strong and so universal? This is where things become really interesting. Social identity theory gives us a new perspective. It suggests that we should not see this mainly as a question of good or bad behavior. Instead, it is a basic psychological process. At its core, it is about who we are, or more precisely, who we are in relation to others. To understand this, we need to look at how our brain usually works. You can imagine it as a sorting machine. Our brain loves categories. Why? Because they bring order to a very complex world. The scientific term for this is social categorization. Researchers Tajfel and Turner described it as a cognitive shortcut. Instead of analyzing every person as a completely unique individual, which would take too much time, we quickly place people, and ourselves, into categories. For example, supporter of Team A, employee of Company B, or resident of City C. This makes the world easier to understand. And now we reach a very important point. These categories are not just neutral labels. They are closely connected to how we see ourselves and to our self-esteem. This idea is the driving force behind the whole process. Think about it. When our group wins, we often feel like winners too. When our group is respected, our own status also rises. Our identity is therefore not only personal, it is also social. According to this theory, we mainly use two strategies to maintain a positive self-image. The first is in-group favoritism. This means we naturally tend to see members of our own group more positively and treat them better. The second is out-group devaluation, where we often judge other groups more critically. Interestingly, both behaviors serve the same psychological goal: to improve the status of our group, and therefore also our own. So we start with a neutral need. We want a positive identity. But at this point the process can turn into something negative, into prejudice and discrimination. Let's go through this step by step. Everything begins with automatic categorization. People are quickly placed into groups. Then these categories become connected to our self-esteem. To feel good about ourselves, we want our group to appear better than others. This constant comparison leads us to exaggerate differences between groups while idealizing similarities within our own group. This is how stereotypes are created. And this is where the real consequences appear. Stereotypes are not just harmless thoughts. Research shows that they often become active justifications. They help people explain why it seems acceptable to keep distance from others. They also help people rationalize why their own group succeeds while other groups fail. In this way, stereotypes reinforce existing social structures. This leads to a frustrating observation. Sometimes you show someone clear facts that disprove a prejudice, and nothing changes. Why does this happen? The answer is simple but uncomfortable. The problem is not only about information. It is about identity. If facts challenge the positive image of my group, it can feel like a threat to my self-esteem. To protect that feeling, people may strongly hold on to beliefs that support their group identity, even when those beliefs are clearly wrong. But there is good news. Social identity theory does not only describe the problem, it also suggests possible solutions. And the logic is quite clear. If division grows from narrow group boundaries, the solution may be to expand those boundaries. Here we see the key strategies. The goal is not to ask people to give up their identity. That rarely works. The real solution is to create a larger and more inclusive we. For example, instead of Department A versus Department B, you create a shared identity such as, we are Company X. This means building a kind of meta-identity that includes the smaller groups instead of replacing them. This is the central idea. When people feel part of a shared project or community, old divisions lose importance. The energy that once went into conflict between groups can now be directed toward reaching common goals. So what is the main lesson from all this? How can we connect this psychological mechanism to our everyday thinking? Perhaps the most important message is this: the tendency to think in terms of us versus them is deeply rooted in human psychology. But, and this is crucial, it is not an unavoidable destiny. It is a mechanism, and what we understand, we can change. Because we know this mechanism, we can shape it consciously. We can turn separation into connection. And that brings us to the final slide and a question for you. Look around in your own environment, at work, in your community, or in your neighborhood. Where do you see this us versus them? And what small step could help turn it into a larger, shared we? Think about it. Today we discussed a study by Blake Ashforth from 1989. If you have questions or topic suggestions, feel free to write to YouTube at EmpowerMIgra.com. EmpowerMIgra, understanding begins with listening.